Well, hello and welcome. Well, for a number of years now, we've known the racing industry as a male-dominated industry. That trend has changed over the past 10 to 25 years with the influx of female trainers and female jockeys. Another part of the racing industry which also has been male-dominated is the broadcast box. That's about to change also with the likes of Victoria Shaw. Victoria is a talented race caller, not only has the distinction of calling all three codes here in Australia, but overseas as well. I caught up with Victoria for a chat this week, not only asked her how she got started in the industry, but also why a number of females haven't followed in her footsteps.
Days, the light continues to blink away. There's evidence with the yellow silks there with the blue spots. A couple of them just fidgeting around in the gates. To be Hammurabi, and they're off and racing, and a good start there. Hammurabi winning the jump nicely from the Harry's Evidence, who's quickly into stride. The Magic Man up on the pace early as they start to gallop their way down in search of the course proper. So the Magic Man is narrowly the leader here as they sort out their order. Going forward now is Mean As up in that group there as well. Over on the outside, Hammurabi, and further in the field there to the Magic Man. Getting back there, Harry's Evidence, who now posies up into about third place. A length and a half, not quite two there, is Blue Suede Hooves as they gallop the side of the track. Hammurabi to his outside, and El Kasabi sees them in. Up the side here at Wyong as they start to approach the home quarter. Mean As here, railing like a greyhound, out in front. Leads here narrowly, just obscuring one over on the outside. That looks to be the Magic Man as they approach the 400 metre mark. Now the run is presented there for Harry's Evidence, who pulls out three wide, approaching the turn. Hammurabi gives chase there as well. Blue Suede Hooves, a wall of horses in advance of him, trying to find a way out. And El Kasabi starts to rattle on late into the home straight. The favourite here, Harry's Evidence, goes for home. Hammurabi is showing the whip as they start to work their way and search the line. And have a look at El Kasabi boxing on late here, but Harry's Evidence will hold on. From El Kasabi in third place there, Hammurabi. Mean As knocked up for fourth. Blue Suede Hooves, and last to greet the judge, the Magic Man.
Well, Victoria Shaw, it's lovely finally to meet you, and thank you for sitting down and spending some time with me.
Oh, Steve, thank you very much. My pleasure. Absolutely wonderful to be here.
Well, Victoria, I mentioned in my intro that the racing industry has been known for a number of years as a male-dominated industry. Now, race calling wouldn't be, I imagine, first choice for many females. How did you become a passion for you?
Steve, initially my interest was in racing merely as a spectator, like so many women and men, and listening to race broadcasting. And I ventured down to 3TR Terrelgan very, very early 90s out of radio school, and I was actually down there for an interview, and as I sat down in reception and looked up on the wall, there was a picture of the late great Bill Collins, who's inspired so many people in the state of Victoria to pick up the binoculars. And it struck me that there was live radio at its best. Now, here we are in 2026, and clearly radio formats have changed, the way we broadcast has changed significantly from that moment. But there's still the same desire, there's still the same passion, and we're there to convey what's happening on the track. And the magic is still on the track, most importantly. And that mesmerises me and so many others. And that's why I'm still in there having a go, so to speak.
Well, every occupation, you need to hone your skills, and you did that via the broadcast box at Flemington and Caulfield about 1997, would that be right?
So I first turned up for practice, very foolish meeting really in hindsight. The Grand National of 1997 is won by the wonderful Angler Parade, prepared by the late great Jim Houlihan. And 12 runners went out on the day, and I remember being in the broadcast box next door to John Russell. And I was in there with my great big daggy tape recorder, as we had back in the 90s, and I thought if I can just get through one race, because prior to that I really didn't know what was involved, not a clue. And it was woeful, it was awful, but I was hooked, and I've been coming back for more ever since. And you know, John had a listen, and it was, you know, probably entirely cringeworthy, but you've got to start somewhere.
Sure.
And unlike a lot of the men we're hearing on air today, when they first picked up the cape, typically when they're teenagers, I was in my mid-20s, so it's a vastly different approach for me. But look, coming out of school, looking at my university acceptance, I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life. Had dabbled in the media, in radio and rural television, things like that. enjoyed some of those roles to a point, but it really didn't grab me. I was quite lost.
Yep.
And then it was just that moment, sitting in reception one day, looking up and seeing Bill's picture, and it just struck me that I was also driving down there, listening to the Melbourne racing station, and Brian Markovic was on air, and he actually called a winner that got up at 100 to 1. And the excitement in his voice, the shock that he conveyed, and the delight too, that was lovely. And to hear that, it was such a surprise. And Brian's delivery was fabulous. And yeah, you thought, well, I'd like a part of that.
Yeah, yep.
So I think, like many of the young men at that point in time who are now on air and have made full-blown careers of the situation, I'm still chasing those dreams and those goals. But yeah, so far it's been an incredible experience.
Now, those early days, you also knocked on the door of a broadcaster named John Tapp. That would have been an experience.
Yes, John Tapp was a lovely opportunity to meet someone of John's standing too. And John, like John Russell in Melbourne, Greg Miles, Brian Martin, Brian Markovic, the late Ray Benson, who sadly we've just lost, and so many others, they're all incredibly generous with their time, and I think they're also pleased that a woman had bothered to express interest. I'm not the first woman in Australia to call races, absolutely not. But there are some women that have called harness trials, I know, in South Australia, I think in Tasmania as well. There's a lady who I think has broadcast some rural thoroughbred events in Queensland many years ago. You know, there are a number of situations. Pamela Knox O'Connor back in 1948, and there's a very strange connection to Pamela and myself. Pamela was the daughter of Sir Errol Knox. So Sir Errol owned and was the publisher of the Argus newspaper in Melbourne. And the Argus was a wonderful coloured broadsheet that rivaled The Age, and sadly wound up production, I think, in the early 1970s. And Sir Errol Knox was also chairman back then of a number of race clubs, had a huge interest in racing, and his daughter Pamela rode in a number of Melbourne hunt clubs with my late grandmother, who I never met. And Pamela, in 1948, was required to get up and broadcast some races at Hanging Rock on New Year's Day, because I think it's fair to say Jack Styring was engaged to call the meeting that day, but Jack wasn't feeling too well. It was New Year's Day, so maybe a headache was the reason. I don't know, and I'm not casting any doubt on Jack's capacity on the day, because I certainly wasn't there, but Pamela took over, and I remember I caught up with Pamela in the very early 2000s. She'd moved, Pamela married into, her maiden name was Knox, she married into the O'Connor racing family, which is synonymous with jumps racing on the South Australian Victorian border. And, you know, throughout her married life, she relocated over there, and I caught up with her at Mount Gambier at the races in the early 2000s before she passed away. And she said to me, she said, I called on the day and I never wanted to do it again. But she did it. She had to jump in. And a lot of the colours racing on the day were silks that a lot of the owners and riders used with hunt club meetings that my grandmother rode in as well. So she's familiar with the colours, and someone had to stand up and take over.
That's great. Do you remember your first race meeting you called?
Yes, and this is where the coincidence with Pamela, the link there continues. So I got up in 1998, New Year's Day, and I have to be honest, I was sort of lured into the situation prematurely, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and you don't want to disappoint people, and I was young and inexperienced and wet behind the ears completely, and scared stiff, and like I got up there with under Jack's wing, and I called a 1600 metre race at Hanging Rock, where Miss Angelique's colours saluted. The Circuit colour was red with the white love hearts, the event over the mile, and it was just, a very interesting coincidence that Pamela was there 50 years earlier to the day, and I got it 50 years later, and that was the beginning of everything. But look, it's been an incredible path. It's difficult. It will always be difficult, but the allure and the magic has never been diminished.
Now, I also mentioned in my preview that you, if you can correct me, my notes if I'm wrong, the only broadcaster to do a broadcast 4 codes in Australia and overseas, is that correct?
As a woman.
As a woman.
Yeah, plenty of men have.
Yep.
But I've been lucky enough to work in Arabian racing, thoroughbred racing, harness racing, and people probably now know my work with greyhound racing, which has been absolutely, a sensational opportunity. I didn't grow up with greyhound racing. Once again, some strange coincidences in my life. When my parents moved in the Dandenong Ranges back in the early 80s, we relocated after the Ash Wednesday bushfires, and I grew up next to Burnham Beaches, the Hilton Nicholas estate. And Hilton Nicholas was chairman of the VRC for many years and brought out many great racehorses to Australia. And Mum and Dad built a house in the very early 1970s adjacent to that property, and back then the grounds and the property were relinquished to the CSIRO. So we used to adjust our horses on the property, and it was probably one of the only private riding tans in Australia left that was still operational and maintained. And I can remember taking my pony along the track around the perimeter of the property, which you can't do now. It is privately owned these days, but hugely significant upon reflection, living on Hilton Road, named after the great man. And then we relocated once the Ash Wednesday bushfire struck, because Mum and Dad realised to get off the mountain with horses, even just a carload of kids and the dog, the roads out were very problematic then, and still are. So we relocated out to land further in the Yarra Valley, and at that point they acquired 14 acres, and we were across the road from a greyhound trainer.
Right, okay, yeah.
And I can remember then putting our overweight Queensland heeler, and the gentleman across the road had an undulating property, and it was quite a steep hill, and he'd have a lure, and he'd send his greyhounds up the hill. And I was like to our rather overweight dog, Sally, come on Sally, we'd put her on the lure, and she'd sort of huff and puff and get halfway and stop. And then, we'd try and have a run ourselves and think, yeah, God, this is tough. But I didn't realise then that perhaps there was my future before my eyes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, some strange things to reflect on now.
One of your big breaks came when you were at Moonee Valley and you called a couple of Arabian races. That would have been interesting.
It was, and the names were incredibly tricky and long-winded, and they still are. I can remember one Arabian horse's name's Warrawee Nazik. God, and some of the heritage of the Arabian culture, and perhaps the stud farm and owners and many, many other influences, and they're quite lengthy names. And we've got some lengthy names with our friends with harness racing as well, like Tailor-Made Lombo and Paleface Adios, and many syllables. But getting your tongue around some of those names was a little bit tricky, but huge opportunity. And I remember the premier of the day was downstairs, Dennis Napthine, great racing man, and a veterinary surgeon as well, who has a huge interest in all codes of racing. Lovely man. He was there. We had our delegates from the United Arab Emirates government, and I got to call two races as the opener, and then it was the Australia Day Stakes that night that Black Caviar won.
Right.
And so it was a huge crowd in attendance, so it was incredibly nervous. And Greg Miles was waiting in the wings. And, in Victorian racing, that's like having God stand behind you. And, so I broadcast those two events, and that was broadcast overseas, and many, many people downstairs. And, it was enormous. And we had a number of young women come out from the United Arab Emirates to ride, and Islamic countries like Oman, where a lot of people are led to believe that these girls aren't doing anything. And we now have, native-born Saudi Arabian jockeys that are women. And the Sheikh of Fatima bint Mubarak racing series, courtesy of the United Arab Emirates government, is a huge program that champions women's opportunities and is extended to many countries and faiths right around the world. And when I was working with them, at that point, up until about 2018, I think we engaged with 86 nationalities, all walks of life. Amazing situation to be engaged with that. And today in Australia, you see the likes of someone like, say, Rachel King. Rachel started with Arabian racing in the UK, and many UK riders was an opportunity for them to gain experience, and then they've progressed onto thoroughbred racing around the world. So it was, a lovely opportunity, an eye-opener.
Coming back to your career, you can tell us the story of going to Hanging Rock for the first time. I believe there's a strange story there.
Oh, good grief. So, Hanging Rock, it was a rather warm day. It was a lovely day. And Jack Storing, who's sadly passed on, great racing man and a bit of a raconteur himself, but yeah, Jack's voice was very distinct, and if I can do my own Jack Storing impersonation, with all respect, you know, oh, well, young girlie, it'll be a lovely day, and I suggest you might wear a nice sun frock. So like a complete tweet, I had to climb the ladder in a rather well-fitting sundress, and yes, I think about 16,000 people knew what colour my undies were that day. So I felt like a complete fool once I got. I feel like, Jack, I will kill you after this. But I was too nervous once I got up there my hands were shaking and trembling and all of this. And yeah, it was...
all part of the experience.
Yes, never again.
Now, also the Northern Territory, Alice Springs. Tell me about the special
Pioneer
bond
Park.
you have there.
That was my first a full meeting radio broadcast. Never forget the call. I got the phone call. Victoria, we need a caller to broadcast our meeting at Pioneer Park. And I think I received the call, was it a Thursday or a Friday? It was a late Thursday. Oh, when's this? This Saturday. Oh, so soon. Oh, I'll think about it. Could you please? And at that point, their race caller was incredibly ill. They'd been in hospital, and I forget the circumstances why, but they needed someone in a bit of a hurry. So I thought, okay, caution to the wind, up we go, because you don't want to knock back an opportunity. But I'm also thinking, you know, what am I in for? And so I get picked up, and you know, you sort of try to turn up looking appropriate for the day. And I was all suited up, and I get picked up in the ute, and they dust off all the chaff in the front seat and threw the dog in the back, and I'm thinking, I don't know why I bothered ironing my shirt, and it was stinking hot, and we get to the track, and look, it was just magic. You've got the McDonald Ranges as a backdrop. It looked like an Albert Namatjira setting, and as the sun set on the mountain range, and all of those colours transpired, and you could see, you know, Albert's watercolours transpiring, and the dust would flick up, that red dust, and there was the club colours, you know, the 4X, red with a gold 4X or gold with a red 4X, and the switching of the caps and all of these sorts of things. The dust would flick up, and you get a bit of a mouthful of it as that gallop past. But it was a huge experience. And Mercedes was on air back in Queensland, and I was trying to work out where the signal was bouncing off. The meeting wasn't televised, but it was on radio, and that was my very first radio broadcast for a full race meeting. So that was about 2:07 or 2:08, and yeah, it was a fantastic day. And my cameraman, who wasn't too far away from where I was positioned, and whereabouts are you from? Oh, just up the road. Yeah, no, it took me 4.5 hours to get here, and I'm thinking, good grief. And you look at where horses had travelled from, like Emerald. And these great distances that they'd travel, and, you know, 7 hours in the float and all these sorts of things. But it was an incredible experience, and and the setting was amazing.
Oh, I must admit, I've enjoyed photographing in the Northern Territory. I've been to 3 of the race courses, Darwin, Adelaide River and Alice Springs. I've photographed at all 3 of them. It is a magic place, but I love the Northern Territory as a whole, not just racing.
And great people.
And great people as well. Now, I know, Victoria, we've spoken about this off camera, about the frustration that you feel that females haven't followed in your footsteps. Can you see the time when down the track when females not only are presenters and tipsters on television, but they may follow you into the footsteps into the broadcast box?
Well, I would love more women to have a look at what race broadcasting involves, and certainly consider the situation, because certainly I'm not the first, and I'm at pains to point that out, but more women would, I think, present racing as something that everyone can enjoy. And that's not to detract from what the men are doing, who are doing an incredible job, and I have huge admiration for them. But there's a lot, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of detractors with racing these days, and I think it's perceived as being sexist when it's not. There's no sign saying women aren't welcome. And if I can go right back, some of my earliest research with some of the things that I've worked on, projects I've worked on at home in my state of Victoria, If I look at Melbourne racing as an example, and there'll be similar situations and parallels right around Australia, some of the earliest situations I could see transpiring for women, my own late grandmother, who's born in 1907, and sadly she passed in 1944, so when my dad was not quite 3. But she was riding in a girls' pony event at Ballarat Racecourse in 1918. So she's 11. So here is a race staged at a race meeting for young girls in front of the crowd to participate. So this is 1918. So we have clear encouragement of girls race riding then. Some of the earliest records I can find is a newspaper clipping that goes back to women riding in an exhibition event in 1907 at Caulfield on a professional race card. And some of the women are actually riding side saddle, incredibly dangerous and very difficult. But so we go back to 1907, we've got them on the track, albeit an exhibition event. Clearly, the mindset is unfolding there, women need to be involved.
So if a young girl came to you tomorrow and said, hey Victoria, I'd like to do what you're doing, follow in your footsteps, that's the advice you'd give them? Get off their phones?
Steve, I'd suggest that she have a look at trials in her area or nearby, whether they be greyhound trials, harness trials or galloping trials for thoroughbreds, and to contact a local race club and see if they can put her in touch with broadcasters that frequent the area, or perhaps reach out to our broadcasting networks to see what's involved. Trials are a great preparation, not just of course for our racing animals and our trainers to gauge their capacity on the track looking ahead to their next events, but to be calling trials is really important. Greyhound trials or coursing is a great way to start because you've just got the pairs. A lot of greyhound clubs will run trials at the conclusion of a meeting. You might get 3 or 4 runners on the track and regularly they'll place coloured rugs on the animals so you can distinguish who's who. You might want to offer to call those trials for free, which I've called harness trials in my life, I've called thoroughbred trials. And a lot of people may not be aware with Healesville Greyhounds, where I call regularly, I used to drive up there on a Friday and take a day off from work, and I would start with 1 or 2 races on air to gain experience there. To jump into a full race card is quite a monumental step, and your nerves will kick in, and you do need the pressure of being live. And this is probably one hurdle within race broadcasting itself, and not unlike the remainder of our friends in the racing community as well. The only way we learn, including our trainers, our jockeys, our harness drivers, and our animals as well, is in full view of the public. So to go live is very important to put that pressure on yourself. Of course, there are picnic thoroughbred meetings, there's non-TAB harness meetings, and you might strike the odd non-TAB greyhound meeting as well, or coursing events. So contact your local race club, offer your services for free, say you'd like to get involved, if they could put you in touch with local broadcasting networks. And I think most importantly, the broadcasting community in Australia, which is predominantly men, would be delighted to see you, because to sit here and say that it is male dominated, it is only that because women are not expressing interest. And it's incredibly unfair to sit here and cast aspersions that the guys that I aspire to being like or working alongside are a bunch of sexist monsters when they're not. They're very welcoming and they're very pleased because many of them have daughters, sisters, mothers, and they don't want to be thought of in an unfavourable light, as to which they're not. They've been an enormous support for me, and I wouldn't be here without them.
Well, again, I have to say it's wonderful to meet you, Victoria, and thank you so much for sitting down and chatting to us and spending some time with us. Victoria Shaw, thank you very much.
Oh, Steve, thank you very much. My pleasure.